Picture a kitchen, not the kitchen in your house, the kitchen in a restaurant, a busy one, a good one supposedly, the kind with white tablecloths in the front room and a maitre d' who looks down his nose at you if your collar isn't right. Now, fill that picture with the smell of 3-day-old beef being scraped off a plate and slopped back into a pot. Add the sound of a cook spitting into a sauce because he's been on his feet for 14 hours and stopped caring somewhere around hour 9. Add a boy, that's you, elbow deep in grease water, fishing out a chunk of bread that fell off someone's plate and watching it get pressed back into service on tomorrow's bread basket. That's a restaurant in 1890s America. That's where we're going tonight. Not as a diner, not as the gentleman in the good suit ordering the turtle soup. We're in the kitchen. We're the ones making it possible for that man to believe he's eating something fresh. So, I make these history stories, and I honestly don't know what half of you are doing listening to them. Either you're falling asleep to tales of people literally eating reconstituted garbage from 1893, or you just enjoy feeling vaguely superior to the past. Either way, here we are. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your hands are never clean. That's the first thing you need to understand about this job, about this life, about every single morning that starts before the sun is up and ends long after it goes down. You can scrub them until the skin cracks. You can dig your nails into a cake of lye soap until your knuckles bleed. But the grease finds a way in. The smell finds a way in. The particular thick, low odour of a restaurant kitchen, meat and fat and old water and something that might be mould and might be worse. It gets into the creases of your fingers and it stays there. You've been at Delmonico's for 6 weeks. Not the real Delmonico's, not the famous one on Fifth Avenue where the Vanderbilts eat. That place wouldn't hire you if you showed up with a letter of recommendation from God himself. No. The place you work is called Delmonico's Dining Rooms, which is a name chosen specifically to make customers think they're getting the Delmonico's experience at half the price. The owner, a thick-necked man from somewhere in Bavaria named Herr Wilhelm Faucher, put that name above the door in 1887 and has been making a comfortable living off the confusion ever since. It's on 23rd Street, 3 blocks from Madison Square, in the kind of neighbourhood that thinks of itself as respectable without quite being able to prove it. The tablecloths are white mostly. The silverware is silver-plated, which is not the same thing, but looks similar in candlelight. The menu is written in French, which none of the cooks actually speak. You're 14 years old, and you sleep in the basement, not in a bedroom, just in the basement. There's a corner near the coal chute where someone left a canvas sack filled with straw, and that's yours. It's close enough to the boiler that in winter you're almost warm, and in summer it's like sleeping inside someone's mouth. You came to New York from a town in western Pennsylvania that doesn't matter anymore. 11 weeks ago you were there. You're not there now. That's the whole story as far as it goes, and most nights you're too tired to think about it anyway. What matters is the kitchen. And right now, right this moment, it's 5 in the morning and the kitchen is already alive. The sound that wakes you is a cleaver hitting a block, not once, not a polite knock, a steady rhythm, thack, 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 like a clock with violence in it. Jacques, who isn't French despite what his name suggests and who is actually from Quebec and deeply bitter about the distinction, is breaking down a side of beef that arrived an hour ago from the meatpacking district on the west side. You know it arrived an hour ago because you were there when it did. Part of your job, the part nobody warned you about, is receiving deliveries. This means that at 4 in the morning you are standing in a service alley off 23rd Street while a man throws things at you from the back of a cart. Crates of vegetables, sacks of flour, and meat. The meat comes wrapped in paper and stacked in wooden crates, and when you lift the crates, sometimes liquid runs over your hands, and you've learned not to think about what that liquid is. You carry it all downstairs, stack it, where you're told to stack it, and then wait for the cleaver. Thack, thack, thack. Boy, that's Jacques. He doesn't know your name. He calls every kitchen boy, boy, regardless of actual age, which you have confirmed includes a man named Harold who's 34. Yes, sir. Ice chest, fish delivery yesterday. Take out the flounder, all of it. You know what this means? It means the flounder from yesterday, 12 portions purchased for service last night, didn't sell. Which isn't unusual. The dining room has its rhythms. Mondays are slow. Tuesdays sometimes worse. On a slow Monday night, 6 portions of flounder might come back to the kitchen intact, still on the plate, barely touched, because a gentleman ordered it and then decided he wasn't hungry after all, and a gentleman's flounder gets covered with a damp cloth and put back in the ice chest. Because it will be served tomorrow, you pull open the ice chest, a deep wooden box lined with zinc, packed around the sides with blocks of ice that came from a frozen pond in upstate New York in February, and cost more than you earn in a week. And you find the flounder, 6 portions, wrapped now, cold and stiff. The smell hits you immediately. Fish smell doesn't lie. There's fresh fish smell, which is clean and cold and oceanic, like standing at the edge of something large. And then there's fish that's been sitting, which is something different entirely. Closer, warmer, a smell that coats the back of your throat and stays there. This fish is not fresh, but it's not your call. It's never your call. You carry the tray to the prep counter and set it down, and Jacques doesn't look at it. He's still working the beef. His hands move with the mechanical precision of a man who has done this 10,000 times, breaking joints and separating muscle groups with a confidence that should probably be more disturbing than it is. Lemon, he says, butter, and get me the sauce from the pot. The sauce is yesterday's sauce. Specifically, it's what's left of the Normandy sauce that was served with flounder last night. You made it yourself. Well, you stood there and stirred while Jacques shouted, and it's a good sauce, cream-based, with fish stock and mushrooms and a measure of white wine that Fauche accounts carefully before he lets anyone use it. Yesterday's sauce, going on to yesterday's fish, to be plated as today's special. That's normal. You know that now. You didn't know it 6 weeks ago. Let me back up. 6 weeks ago, on your first day, you thought this was going to be different. You thought restaurants were, restaurants. You'd eaten in 2 of them in your life, both times special occasions, both times you were wearing your good shirt that was really just your only shirt washed extra times. And they had seemed like places where things were right, where the food was the food it said it was, where something that said fresh daily was fresh and daily. You were, in the gentlest possible terms, wrong. Your first morning, a Sunday, Herr Fauche himself walked you through the dining room and the kitchen and explained the operation. He was proud of this place. You could see it in the way he moved through it, heavy-shouldered, deliberate, like a man inspecting something he'd built with his own hands, which he had. The dining room first, white tablecloths as promised, dark wooden chairs, gas-lit wool sconces that Fauche was considering converting to electricity, a decision he'd been considering for 3 years without acting on. The bar along one wall, mahogany, genuine. A large mirror behind it that made the room look twice as big. 60 covers, Fauker said, meaning 60 seats. Full on weekends, good midweek. The customers, they like to think they are somewhere better than they are. He said this without embarrassment, almost admiringly. The food is what they come for. Good food, reasonable prices, not Delmonico's prices. He smiled, but good. Then he took you into the kitchen, and that was the end of the naive part of your life. The kitchen at Delmonico's dining rooms is roughly 20 feet by 30 feet, which sounds like enough space until you understand that it needs to hold 2 coal-burning ranges, each with 6 burners and 2 ovens, a prep counter that runs the full length of one wall, the ice chest, a dry goods storage area, the dish station, which is your primary domain, and which consists of a waist-high trough of water, a scrub, brush, and optimism. A small office, really a desk and a stool, where Fauscher sits to do accounts, and at any given time during service, 7 to 12 people all moving at once in different directions with hot things in their hands. On that first Sunday, it was quiet. The prep cooks were working, but slowly. Jacques wasn't there. The ranges were warm, but not roaring. Fauscher showed you the larder first. A cold room, stone-floored, connected to the kitchen by a short corridor. The ice chest lived here, along with shelves of covered dishes and canisters and ceramic crocks. The system, Fauker said, gesturing at the shelves with a broad hand, is very precise. Every item has its place. Every day, stock is rotated, first in, first out. He said this in the way people say things that are theoretically true but practically flexible. What do you do with things that don't sell, you asked. You were 14 and naive, and it seemed like a reasonable question. Forker looked at you, not unkindly, more the way a teacher looks at a student who has asked something that reveals they haven't understood the lesson. We do not waste, he said. Waste is money leaving the building through the garbage. This does not happen in my kitchen. You thought this meant they were careful, efficient, that there were clever ways to use up every carrot and every beef bone that would have otherwise been thrown away. You were again wrong. But you didn't understand that yet. The soup is where it starts. The soup is always where it starts, in any restaurant, in any decade of the 19th century. If you want to understand how a kitchen really works, not the fiction it presents to the dining room, but the actual machinery underneath, follow the soup. At Delmonico's dining room, soup is served at lunch and dinner. The menu changes weekly, in theory. In practice, there are 5 soups that rotate on a schedule loosely connected to what didn't sell earlier in the week. Monday, mock turtle, which is not made from turtle, it's made from a calf's head, prepared to approximate the gelatinous richness of actual turtle soup, which is expensive, and which Fauscher serves only to people who specifically request it and are clearly prepared to pay. Tuesday, vegetable, which is to say the accumulated cooking liquid from whatever vegetables were prepared in the previous 2 days, enriched with whatever meat scraps were too small or too odd to be served as anything else, thickened with a starch and seasoned until it tastes like something. Wednesday, French onion, which is legitimate and which Jacques makes with a genuine care that suggests he's not entirely given over to the compromises of this kitchen. Thursday, what the kitchen calls the pot au feu, which is a French name for what is essentially a very long-cooked broth, made from the bones of every animal that passed through the kitchen earlier in the week. Beef bones, chicken carcasses, veal trimmings, fish bones if they haven't turned too far. All of it goes into the stockpot on Monday evening, simmers through Tuesday, has things added to it on Wednesday, gets strained on Thursday, and becomes the day's soup. Friday. The pot-au-feu broth with whatever needs using up that can't survive another day. The thing is, the soup is actually good. You've tasted it. You know what goes into it, which means you probably shouldn't be able to taste it without feeling something unpleasant. But the truth is that long-cooked stock from varied bones and meat scraps, properly seasoned and carefully skimmed, tastes like depth, like something ancient and certain. You've thought about this, about how the best thing on the menu is made from things that would otherwise be garbage. You're not sure what to do with that information. Here's what nobody tells you about restaurant work in 1890. The hierarchy is absolute. At the top, in terms of daily power, is the chef de cuisine. At Delmonico's dining rooms, this is Jacques, who is 31 years old and who came to New York from Montreal at 23, with skills learned in a hotel kitchen and an ambition that has been quietly eroded by 8 years of this particular operation. Jacques is not cruel. He's not kind either. He exists in a state of professional concentration that has no room for either quality. He knows exactly what everything costs, how long everything lasts, and what can be done to extend that duration. He is, in the most morally neutral sense of the phrase, very good at his job. Below Jacques, the sous chef, a woman named Mrs. Patrice Oberlin, which is unusual. Female cooks were common, female sous chefs were not. She'd arrived 2 years before you with a reference from a restaurant in Baltimore and a reputation for pastry work that Jacques had hired her for specifically. She's 40 years old and has the steady, economical movements of someone who has been doing physical work since childhood. Below her, 2 prep cooks, both men, one named Vincenzo, who's from somewhere in southern Italy, and speaks limited English but understands every instruction given in the language of knives and fire, and one named Thomas, who's from Brooklyn, and who has worked here for 4 years and knows where everything is buried, metaphorically speaking. Below them, 2 kitchen girls who handle the cold preparations, salads, cold appetizers, the cheese plate, and who are 17 and 16 respectively, and named Rose and Francis, and who communicate with each other in a rapid private shorthand that you've never been able to decode. And below all of them, you are the kitchen boy, the plongeur in French kitchen terminology, though nobody in this kitchen uses the term. What you are is the person who washes the dishes, carries the coal, receives the deliveries, runs the errands nobody else has time for, and serves as a general buffer between the kitchen's needs and the physical world's inconvenient refusal to supply them automatically. You're the lowest person in this hierarchy. This means you see everything. The breadbasket is a perfect system if you think about it the right way. Here is how bread works at a restaurant like Delmonico's dining rooms in 1893. Fresh bread arrives every morning from a bakery 3 blocks north. White rolls mostly, some darker rye. The bread for the breakfast service is fresh. The bread for the lunch service is from the morning delivery and is still fine. The bread for the dinner service is from the morning delivery and is less fine, but it's been kept in a cloth-covered basket in the larder, and it presents well, and by the time a gentleman has had a cocktail and settled into his chair, he's not conducting scientific analysis on the rolls, the bread that comes back from tables, the untouched rolls in the basket, the slices that were set down and ignored. That bread does not get thrown away. You learned this on your second day when you started clearing tables after the lunch service and brought a basket of untouched rolls back to the kitchen and moved to throw them in the waste bin, and Thomas caught your wrist. "Don't," he said. "They came back from the table." "I know where they came from. Put them in the rack." The rack is a wooden shelf near the oven, which runs warm throughout service. The returned rolls go on the rack. They dry slightly, or they're refreshed with a spritz of water and a few minutes in a warm oven, and at the next service they go back into baskets. "What if someone had already touched them?" you asked. Thomas looked at you. "Looked at them," you amended. Thomas had the expression of a man who had made peace with a great many things and was now watching someone else begin the same journey. "You see many customers with bread disease," he said. "No, you keep the bread." You kept the bread. What you discovered over the following weeks was that the bread had a lifespan in this kitchen of approximately 4 days before it became something other than bread. Day 1, fresh. Day 2, fine. Day 3, warmed and presented. Day 4, the bread from day 4 went into the bread pudding, or into the bread dumplings that appeared in the Thursday soup, or got crumbled and dried into bread crumbs that went onto the gratiny dishes. If it made it to day 5, and it rarely did, because the kitchen was well managed enough that old bread got used before it reached that point, it became the substance that got soaked in yesterday's stock and pressed into a kind of savoury cake that Thomas called mystery loaf, and which was served during the lunch service to the kitchen staff. You ate the mystery loaf. It tasted fine. That was the more disturbing discovery. 8 weeks into the job, on a Tuesday evening in October, you watched Vincenzo do something with butter. You'd been assigned to prep station that evening because Rose had a cold and couldn't come in, which moved everyone up one position, which moved you from dishes to the cold station, which meant you were in the actual kitchen proper for the first time during a service rather than standing at the dish station listening to it. It was loud. You hadn't understood how loud it would be, even having heard it from the dish station for weeks. The Rangers roared. Jacques called orders in a clipped, rapid cadence that the other cooks responded to without looking up. The ticket rail along the pass, the metal strip where orders hung on clips, was full within 20 minutes of service opening, and it stayed full for 3 hours. Your job at the cold station was limited. Plate the salads, manage the cold appetizers, keep things organized. Frances was at the station beside you, moving with the assured speed of someone who'd been doing this for 2 years, and she occasionally reached across and corrected your plating without comment, just repositioning a leaf of lettuce, or adjusting the placement of a radish with 2 fingers and moving on. That was when you saw the butter. At Delmonico's dining rooms, butter came to the table in small ceramic ramekins, each containing a moulded portion about the size of a large marble. The mould was a small press that stamped a fleur-de-lis onto the top. It looked elegant. The butter on the tables at the end of service, the butter that had come back from the tables, sitting at a room temperature for however long the meal had lasted, that butter went back into the kitchen. Vincenzo was at the range, but this was before service, during afternoon prep, and you were watching him collect the returned butter ramekins. He scraped the butter out of each one into a large mixing bowl, all of it, including the pieces that had clearly been handled, spread partially, touched, pressed with a finger to test the temperature, into the bowl. He added fresh butter, a large block from the ice chest, and worked the whole mass together with a spatula until the old and new were indistinguishable. Then he packed it back into the moulds, pressed the fleur-de-lis stamp onto each one, set them back in the cold station. ready for service. You said nothing. You weren't sure there was anything to say. And Vincenzo's expression, had you been able to read it clearly, would have told you that he had done this approximately 400 times and expected to do it 400 more. What you did was this. You took a mental inventory of all the other things in the kitchen that operated on the same principle. The things that went out and came back and went out again. The recycling of presentation. The performance of freshness layered over something older. It didn't take long. The list was longer than you expected. Let me tell you about the hash. This is the centerpiece. This is the mechanism at the heart of every restaurant kitchen in America in the 1890s. The thing that makes the economics work. The thing without which the price on the menu would need to be significantly higher, or the profit margin significantly lower, and neither of those outcomes was acceptable to the men who owned these places. The hash, beef hash specifically, or corned beef hash, or hash of the house, which was what Delmonico's dining rooms called it, and which suggested something specific and trademarked, and which was in fact the most honest thing on the menu in the sense that it was genuinely the hash of the house, whatever the house had. Here's how it's made. The beef that comes through a restaurant kitchen in a week exists in a hierarchy of its own. The prime cuts go to the dining room whole. The roasts, the steaks, the braised short ribs that Jacques slow cooks for 4 hours, and which are genuinely excellent and which justify some of the restaurant's reputation. These cuts are expensive. They're handled carefully. They go out in precise portions with precise sauces, and they're expensive on the menu because they're expensive to produce. But around the edges of the expensive cuts there's always something else. The irregular pieces, the end cuts, the bits that can't be presented as a steak because they're too small, or because they have too much connective tissue, or because they've been sitting one day too long and the colour has shifted in a way that makes them unsuitable for uncooked presentation. These pieces go into the stockpot or they go into the hash. The hash pot at Delmonico's dining rooms is a large cast iron vessel that lives on a back burner, and this is not an exaggeration, never empty. New material goes in every day. Old material gets cooked further. The whole thing turns over completely about once a week, meaning that on Monday the hash contains the remnants of last Monday, metabolized through a week of heat and addition into something that no longer has a discernible temporal identity. You could not tell you, with any scientific confidence, whether the piece of beef in your Monday hash started its journey in this kitchen in the previous week or the week before, or the week before that. It's been cooked enough times that it's no longer recognizably itself. This is the dish that appears on the lunch menu as hash of the house for 25 cents. It is served with eggs. The eggs are fresh, because eggs are cheap, and eggs don't hash well. The toast under it is from day 2 bread. The potatoes folded into it are the ones that were roasted yesterday, and weren't served, and were set aside this morning for exactly this purpose. Faucher charges 25 cents. Jacques makes it without visible guilt. The customers order it happily, because it is, and here is the maddening thing, the thing that takes you weeks to come to terms with. It's actually good. The long, slow cooking renders the beef to something that falls apart at the touch of a fork. The fat that's rendered into the pan over days of accumulation gives it a richness that fresh beef alone doesn't have. The layering of different cooking stages creates something complex and deep. You eat the hash yourself, in the hour between lunch and dinner prep, sitting on an upturned crate near the alley door because the kitchen is too hot to eat inside. It's good. You hate that it's good. The dining room doesn't know any of this. That's the part that takes up residence in the back of your mind and stays there, a tenant you didn't invite. You clear tables during service sometimes when you're done with dishes and the dining room runner is overwhelmed. You carry plates from the kitchen, learn the correct way to approach a table. From the left for food, from the right for drinks, never reaching across a guest, never making eye contact unless they initiate it. The dining room is a different country. It's warm, lit softly. The gas jets turn to a glow rather than a glare. The sound is conversation and the gentle percussion of silverware. The smell, and this is the remarkable part given what you know about what's happening 20 feet away. The smell is good. Roasting meat, something buttery and rich. The faint sweetness of Mrs. Oberlin's desserts drifting through from the pastry station. The people at the tables are dressed for the occasion. Not Vanderbilt-level finery, but effort, care. Women in good dresses, hair properly arranged. Men in suit coats, some with watch chains. A table of 4 near the window that you've come to think of as the regulars, because they're here every Thursday. Always the same 4 men, always ordering the same things, always leaving a reasonable tip for the waiter but nothing for the kitchen. They believe they're in a good restaurant. They are, by 1890s standards, in a reasonable restaurant. The gap between those two things is where you live. The gap is the breadcrumbs on yesterday's fish. The gap is the butter pressed back into the mould. The gap is the hash that has no beginning. The gap is the soup that connects this week to last week, through the continuous thread of the stockpot. And here's the thing. Here's the thing that takes you months to fully understand, and which you're only beginning to grasp right now in October 1893, in a kitchen on 23rd Street. The gap is everywhere. Not just here, not just at Delmonico's dining rooms, at every restaurant in the city, at the grand ones on 5th Avenue, and the modest ones on 9th Avenue, and the lunch counters on Broadway, and the hotel dining rooms and the chop houses near the financial district where the stockbrokers eat. All of them. There is an entire economy of recycled food happening beneath the level of what any customer ever sees, and it is operating smoothly and profitably, and has been for as long as restaurants have existed, and nobody is talking about it, and very few people are even particularly aware that it's wrong. This is 1893. This is the year. The food safety movement is a rumour. The idea of government regulation of restaurant kitchens is, to most restaurant owners, as fantastical and offensive as the idea of government regulation of their thoughts. You're 14 years old, and you're slowly becoming the kind of person who knows things he can't unknow. The oysters almost break you. This happens in November, 3 months in, on a Friday when the oyster delivery arrives and you're told to help Vincenzo prepare for the evening service. Oysters were fashionable in 1893. They were cheap, genuinely cheap compared to almost any other protein, because the oyster beds in the harbour were still productive, and they were considered elegant, and the combination of cheap and elegant is irresistible to restaurant economics. Delmonico's dining rooms served oysters on the half-shell at the beginning of dinner service. 6 for 30 cents, which was a fair price. The oysters came from a supplier on Fulton Street who received them twice weekly, from beds in Long Island Sound and New Jersey. The oysters that arrived on Tuesday were good. The oysters that arrived on Tuesday and weren't served on Tuesday, those were less good by Friday. The problem with oysters, from a practical standpoint, is that they're alive when they're served, or they should be. A live oyster, when you tap its shell, will close. This is how you check. If it's open and doesn't close when you tap it, the oyster is dead, and a dead oyster that has been sitting at or near room temperature in its own brackish liquid is not something you should put in a person's mouth. The practice, not unique to this kitchen, not invented here, practiced everywhere along the economic food chain of New York restaurant culture, was to freshen the oysters. What this means in practice, you take the oysters that have been in the ice chest since Tuesday, and you put them in a wooden tub of cold tap water. Fresh, cold water. The change in salinity and temperature causes some of the more stubborn closed ones to reseal. The ones that are only slightly fatigued will tighten up. You add a small measure of salt to the water to bring it closer to seawater. You leave them for an hour. When you drain them and set them on the shaved ice for service, they look better, more vigorous, less suspicious. Some of them close when you tap them. Not all. The ones that don't close, there's a professional judgment call about how many of those make it onto the ice for service and how many end up in the chowder. Vincenzo showed you this process without particular emotion. His hands moved through it the way Jacques' hands moved through everything, with the mechanical certainty of ingrained habit. You asked, "If someone gets sick from an oyster?" Vincenzo looked at you. He had a broad face, olive-skinned, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he slept about as well as you did, meaning not very. "People get sick," he said. "Stomach upset, maybe bad fever. The oyster is not always the thing." "But if it is the thing?" Vincenzo shrugged, not callously, more in the manner of a man who had looked at this equation from several angles and arrived at a position of philosophical acceptance. "Then they don't come back to complain." He meant that people who got food poisoning from oysters didn't typically know it was the oysters. They thought they had a stomach bug. Doctors in 1893 weren't connecting dots between restaurant meals and gastrointestinal illness in any systematic way. The germ theory of disease was newly understood and not yet widely applied to food safety. People got sick. It was part of life. It rarely killed healthy adults. It killed children and old people, and those already weakened by something else. But healthy adults of working age, which was most of the clientele at Delmonico's dining rooms, mostly suffered and recovered and didn't make the connection. You helped prepare the oysters for service. You went to the dish station afterward and washed your hands 3 times with lye soap. Your hands smelled like oyster water for 2 days. Winter comes to a restaurant kitchen like a siege. Outside, it's cold. November slides into December, and the city hardens, and the streets are either frozen mud or frozen ice, depending on whether it rained the night before, and the coal smoke lies low over the buildings, and the Hudson has ice forming at its edges. In the kitchen, it's hot. It's always hot. The ranges burn coal all day, and the heat they generate in a room that size with that many burners going raises the temperature to something you can barely describe as inhabitable. You work in your shirt sleeves in December. The sweat on your back soaks through your shirt within an hour of starting. The cold storage problem gets worse in winter, paradoxically. Ice deliveries become less reliable. The ice that was packed away in summer, cut from frozen ponds and packed in sawdust in purpose-built ice houses upstate, it's running lower by February. Prices go up. Ferscher starts rationing it, which means the ice chest runs warmer than it should. Things go off faster when the ice chest is warmer. This means more freshening, more sauce applied more generously to mask whatever the underlying ingredient's condition has become. More hash, more soup, more of everything being cooked longer because heat is the great equalizer. Applied long enough and hot enough, heat will cook away evidence of many things. Jacques adapts without apparent distress. You've come to understand that Jacques, whatever else he is a problem solver. He looks at the larder in the morning the way a chess player looks at the board after the opponent's move, assessing, calculating, determining the best path through available resources. Lamb, he says one February morning, lifting a cloth from a tray in the cold room. The lamb beneath it is from the previous Thursday. It was meant for Friday service, but Friday was slow and it didn't move. Today is Tuesday. He examines it, his nose close to the surface, his hands pressing lightly. Braised, he says, deep sauce, rosemary, prune. This is the formula. The longer something has been waiting, the more it gets cooked, and the stronger the flavouring around it. A fresh piece of lamb is grilled quickly and served with a light juice. A 3-day-old piece of lamb is braised for 2 hours and buried in a sauce with assertive flavours, rosemary, wine, dried fruit, that overpower anything the meat might be contributing on its own. This is the taxonomy of restaurant recycling. Day 1, simple preparation. The food speaks for itself. Day 2, enhanced preparation. Sauce, spice, additional aromatics. Day 3, transformative preparation. Long cooking, strong flavours, changed form. Day 4, the hash, the soup, the stuffing, the pie filling. Day 5, you don't want to know. There isn't usually a day 5. The system is efficient enough that most things get cycled before they reach day 5. When they do reach day 5, they go in the stockpot. And the stockpot, as you've learned, has no day 5. The stockpot has no day at all. It exists outside of time. Mrs. Oberlin teaches you something important about sugar. This happens in January, in the middle of an afternoon when the kitchen is quiet. That brief hour between lunch clean-up and dinner prep when the noise levels drop, and you can sometimes hear the street sounds coming through the alley door. Horses, someone shouting in what might be Italian 2 buildings over, the distant whistle of a train. Mrs. Oberlin is making a fruit tart, and she lets you watch. Not because she's kind necessarily, though she's not unkind. More because she teaches by demonstration, and you happen to be standing in the right place. The fruit for the tart is canned fruit. Peaches. The can was opened yesterday and the remaining peaches stored in the ceramic crock in the cold room, covered with a cloth. But before the peaches, she shows you the pastry cream from yesterday's eclairs. There is leftover pastry cream from lunch service. There is always leftover pastry cream from something, because it doesn't keep well. Really, it doesn't keep past 24 hours without refrigeration considerably colder than the ice chest provides. And yet here it is, in a bowl, slightly separated at the edges from yesterday. She adds a measure of heavy cream, beats it together with the old pastry cream, adds vanilla, a measure of sugar. It coheres. It looks like pastry cream. The sugar, she says, watching her hands rather than you, is a preservative. Bacteria don't grow as well in a high-sugar environment. High-acid environment is the same. Why do we put wine in sauces? Not just for flavour, the acidity. It controls things. She says this as a fact of kitchen science, not as a justification. She's not defending the practice. She's explaining the mechanism. Does it always work? Mostly. She pauses. Sometimes someone gets the runs. That's life. She says this with the same tone you might say, sometimes it rains. You have been in this kitchen long enough to understand that someone gets the runs is the acceptable casualty rate of 1890s restaurant operation. It happens. People associate it with their own bodies, their own constitutions. Maybe they ate too fast or drank too much. Doctors, if they're consulted at all, rarely know what to say. The connection between specific restaurant meals and specific gastrointestinal events is almost never made formally. This is the mechanism by which the system continues, not because the people operating it are monsters, not because they're indifferent to suffering, but because the feedback loop doesn't exist. Nobody comes back to Delmonico's dining rooms and says, "I was sick for 3 days after your oysters." They just don't come back. They come back and don't order the oysters again, and Foucher never knows why the oyster orders are down in November and suspects it might be seasonal. The system runs on the absence of information. There is one person in the kitchen who makes you uncomfortable in a specific way, and that person is Thomas. Thomas has been here for 4 years. He's 27 from Brooklyn, with a wide, sharp-featured face and eyes that seem to be calculating something continuously. He's good at his job, genuinely skilled, the kind of cook who can put out plates consistently under pressure night after night. But there's something about the way he approaches the kitchen's practices that goes beyond acceptance and into something that might be called enthusiasm. It's Thomas who taught you about the restaurant mix. The restaurant mix is what happens to the contents of half-drunk wine bottles. In 1893, wine is served by the bottle at dinner. People order a bottle, drink most of it, leave the rest. The waiter clears the table. The bottle comes back to the kitchen. Now, the wine that's left in those bottles, 2 inches, 3 inches, it's still wine. It's fine. It's been open for an hour, maybe less. A person at home would put a cork in it and drink it tomorrow. At Delmonico's dining rooms, it goes into a large ceramic jug behind the service door. All of it. Red with red, white with white, in theory. In practice, not always. The restaurant mix, once the jug is full, goes into the cooking. Sauces, braises, the wine-poached pears that appear on the dessert menu. This is reasonable, legitimate even. Any cook will tell you that cooking wine doesn't need to be fine wine. Except Thomas doesn't always stop there. You see him one evening pouring the restaurant mix. The contents of 3 different return bottles, at least 2 reds, and something that might be a rosé, into a decanter. What's that for? Slow night tonight, Thomas says. Fulcher said to sell what we have. And that wine, the mix of 3 tables worth of returned wine, decanted so it looks like a fresh bottle, that goes back to the floor, gets sold to the next customer who orders a carafe. You stand very still for a moment. They won't notice, Thomas shrugs. House red is house red. Nobody ordering house red on a Tuesday is an expert. He says this not cruelly, practically, as though he's explaining the price of coal. You don't say anything. There's nothing to say. You're 14, and Thomas is 27, and Fulcher is downstairs in his office counting money, and the dining room is filling up, and the ticket rail is about to get crowded, and service is service and life is life. You go back to the dish station. That night, washing dishes, you think about the gentleman at table 7 who ordered the house red and seemed to enjoy it. He had a good meal. He'll probably come back. He doesn't know that what he was drinking was a democracy of other people's unfinished glasses. Maybe that's fine. Maybe it's not. Maybe the line between resourceful and fraudulent is thinner than you thought. Maybe in 1893 there is no line, or the line is in a different place than it would be later, or the very concept of a right to know what's in your food is so far from being articulated that it doesn't exist yet as a moral framework in any useful sense. You wash the dishes. Your hands are never clean. The ice cream incident happens on a Thursday in late January, and this is the one that makes you feel sick in a way that the fish and the butter and the hash and even the oysters didn't quite manage. Ice cream was fashionable, enormously fashionable. Mrs. Oberlin made it fresh twice weekly, cranking it in the hand-turned freezing bucket with rock salt and ice, and it was genuinely good. The kind of ice cream that tastes like somebody cared, smooth and dense and clean. It was expensive to make. The cream cost, the ice cost, the time cost, portions that came back from tables, desserts left half-finished, plates cleared with ice cream melted into soup. Those couldn't be reused in any obvious way, except when ice cream melts, it becomes cream, and cream can be frozen again. Mrs. Oberlin would collect the remnants, strain them for the larger solids, combine them with fresh cream and sugar, refreeze. The problem, and you understand this problem even without any scientific education on the matter, is that ice cream melted at room temperature and sitting on a plate for 20 minutes has been at room temperature for 20 minutes. It's been handled, breathed on, possibly touched. It contains whatever the person eating it was carrying in terms of their own personal biology. You refroze it, and it went back out. The thing that makes this particular practice feel worse than the others, worse than the oysters even, is the dessert. People eat dessert with a certain openness, sweetness of mood. They've had their meal, they've drunk their wine, and they're relaxed and pleased. And here comes something sweet and cold and beautiful, and they take it with a kind of trust that you now understand is completely misplaced. You never say this to Mrs. Oberlin. You don't have the words for it, or the authority, or the courage. You just stand at the dish station and wash things and think thoughts that you can't unfold into sentences yet. This is part 1. The story continues. Please say continue, and I'll pick up from here, taking you deeper into the kitchen. The night of the inspector, the sickness that comes in March, what Thomas shows you about the beef that came back from a wedding, and the moment you have to make a decision that's more complicated than a 14-year-old should have to make. We're about 7,500 words in. The target is 20,000 to 25,000. We have a long night ahead. Get comfortable. Continue 235 plotted narrative continuation toward word count target. Plotted narrative continuation toward word count target. Spring in a restaurant kitchen arrives not as warmth, but as smell. The city thaws in March, and everything that's been frozen under the streets and packed into the ice-hardened gutters releases at once. The horse manure that accumulated through December and January and February, compacted by cold into something almost structural. It loosens, it flows. The air above 23rd Street in the first week of March 1894 smells like an argument between winter and rot, and winter is losing. Inside the kitchen, the smell is different but related. The ice chest, which has been running marginally warmer since February, starts struggling against the rising temperature. The cold room that stays cold enough in December feels closer to merely cool by March, and cool is not cold, and the difference between cold and cool is the difference between safe and the particular shade of unsafe that has no name yet in 1893 because bacteriology is barely 20 years old and has not yet been translated into kitchen policy anywhere in the United States. You notice it first in the butter, not the taste. You're not tasting the butter. The smell. A faint sourness underneath the dairy smell that wasn't there in February. You mention it to Vincenzo, who's at the prep counter working on vegetables. Vincenzo sniffs in the direction of the butter without approaching it. "It's fine," he says. "It smells different." "It's March," Vincenzo says, as though this explains everything. Which, in the logic of this kitchen, it does. March means things go faster. March means the margins get tighter. March means Jacques is in the cold room every morning before anyone else, doing his calculations with his nose and his hands, deciding what can still be used and what cannot, and the line he draws between those two categories shifts slightly southward as the weeks progress. You are not the one who draws the line. You are the one who carries out whatever's on the right side of it. The wedding delivery arrives on a Tuesday. You don't know it's from a wedding at first. It arrives in the afternoon, 2 hours before dinner service, in a cart that pulls up to the service alley and disgorges a quantity of food that seems briefly miraculous. Roast beef. A full standing rib roast, actually 2 of them, which represents more beef than Delmonico's dining rooms typically processes in 3 days. Cooked, sliced partially, and then the knife abandoned as though whoever was carving simply stopped mid-task. Roasted potatoes, whole, cold, in a wooden crate. Vegetables, green beans, carrots, in a large covered pot, already cooked, already seasoned. And bread. Dozens of rolls, white, slightly stale, in 3 linen-lined baskets. Plus an untouched cake. White, multi-tiered, decorated with sugar flowers, with 1 slice missing. Thomas comes out to the alley to look at it. "Where's this from?" The man driving the cart is heavy-set, wearing a wool coat with a grease stain on the lapel. "Hotel on 34th. Banquet kitchen. They overcooked for a party last night. Wedding. They got twice as much food as they needed. Manager wants rid of it before it starts causing problems." Thomas nods slowly. "What are they asking?" A price is negotiated. You don't catch the figure, but by the expression on Thomas's face when the cart drives away, it was low. Very low. The kind of price you charge when the alternative is paying someone to haul it to the garbage. Thomas stands in the alley looking at the food with the focused expression of a man doing rapid arithmetic. "Get Jacques," he says. Jacques comes out to the alley and looks at the food for about 30 seconds without speaking. Then he lifts the cloth over the roast beef. His hands find a slice, press it lightly. His nose goes close. "When was this cooked?" "Yesterday," Thomas says. "Event ended around midnight." "And it was warm how long?" Thomas shrugs. "Event was 4 hours. Before that, hotel kitchen prep. Call it 3 hours in the warm zone." Jacques straightens up. His face shows the calculation happening behind it. 7 hours at warm temperatures, give or take, plus whatever cooling happened overnight in what may or may not have been adequate refrigeration at the hotel. You're standing close enough to smell the roast beef yourself. It smells like roast beef. Good roast beef, well seasoned, with the dark crust of the outer layer and the pink interior showing where it was sliced. It smells like Sunday dinner at a family table, like something made with care and pride. That smell is, you've learned, not reliable information. Deep braise, Jacques says. All of it. Tonight. This is the formula. You've seen it enough times to understand the logic now. If food has been at questionable temperatures for a questionable period of time, the answer is heat. Long, high, sustained heat. Not because heat reverses whatever might be growing in the meat, it doesn't necessarily depending on what it is, but because it's the best available option, and the alternative is throwing away 2 standing rib roasts and whatever Fosha paid for them, and that option does not exist. "The potatoes?" you ask. Nobody asked you, but you ask. Jacques looks at you, not angrily, he's used to you asking things. Hash, he says. The roasted potatoes, cooked yesterday, cold now, go into the hash. They'll be cut up, fried in fat in the large cast-iron pan, combined with the meat scraps that come off the beef after Jacques breaks it down. The wedding roast becomes the Wednesday hash, becomes lunch for a dining room full of people who don't know and won't know. The cake? Thomas asks. Jacques looks at the white cake with its one missing slice and its sugar flowers. How old? Made yesterday for sure. Could be the day before. A pause. Cut off the frosting, the interior is fine. Crumble it. Bread pudding. Thomas nods. You carry the food inside. The sickness comes in the 3rd week of March. Not epidemic. Not disaster. Not the kind of thing that gets written up in newspapers. Just a Tuesday and a Wednesday and a Thursday, during which Foucault gets 3 complaints. 3 complaints is unusual. Foucault, in the normal run of things, gets perhaps 1 complaint per week, usually about service rather than food. A waiter who was slow, a reservation mishandled. Food complaints are rarer, because people don't typically complain about food at restaurants. They just don't come back. These complaints are different. The first, a man who ate dinner on Monday, the beef braise, who sends a note by messenger on Wednesday saying he was unwell Tuesday and asks if anyone else had complained. The second, a woman who was at the same dinner service, same dish, who stopped by the restaurant in person on Thursday looking pale and thin and wanting to speak to the owner. The third, a letter, unsigned, brief, written in an angry hand on heavy paper, describing in somewhat clinical terms what the writer had experienced after Tuesday's lunch service and what the writer suspected was the cause. You don't read the letters. You hear about them from Francis, who hears things, who knows things, who has been here long enough to understand that information in this kitchen travels through certain channels and not others. Forscher's nervous, Francis tells you, in the rapid, quiet shorthand she normally reserves for Rose. She's talking to you because Rose is sick, a coincidence that strikes you as potentially ironic but that you don't say out loud. Jacques is nervous. Thomas is pretending he's not nervous. The beef from the wedding is what they think. What's going to happen? Francis gives you a look that's almost sympathetic. She's 17, and she's been doing this for 2 years, and she has the particular worldliness of someone who arrived young and learned fast. Nothing's going to happen. Nobody's going to die. People got sick. They'll get better. Foucault will write back very politely and say he's sorry, and perhaps there was a problem with the supplier and he's investigating. He'll give them a free dinner. And nothing actually changes. What would change? You don't have an answer. There's no health inspector with authority over restaurant kitchens in New York in 1894. There are no federal food safety laws. There's no mechanism by which 3 complaints and a case of food poisoning become policy. There are no consequences in any formal sense for what happened. The consequence is 3 sick people and a nervous week in a kitchen on 23rd Street. That's all. Francis goes back to the cold station. You go back to the dishes. Rose comes back on Friday and says she had a stomach bug. She doesn't connect it to the kitchen. She's been eating the staff meals for 2 years and has probably had similar stomach bugs before, and the connection doesn't form. The wedding beef is gone by then, fully consumed, gone through the hash and the braise and the soup and whatever else, metabolized through the kitchen system and out the other side. By the following Monday, it's as if it never arrived. You're 15 by the spring. Your birthday passes without much ceremony. You mention it to no one and no one knows, and Fauscher doesn't track staff birthdays. What changes at 15 is less about the day and more about the accumulation of months. You know things now. You know the geography of this kitchen the way you know your own body, automatically, without having to think about it. You know which floorboard near the range creaks if you step on the left side and doesn't creak if you step on the right. You know that the ice chest latch sticks in humid weather and you have to lift slightly before pulling. You know that Jacques is in a bad mood on days when the meat delivery is late, and a different kind of bad mood on days when Fauscher has been in the kitchen asking questions, and a surprisingly good mood on Fridays after service when he drinks 2 glasses of something from a bottle he keeps in the office he shares with Fauscher's desk. You know Mrs. Oberlin's tells, when she's making something she's genuinely proud of, her posture changes slightly, her shoulders drop a fraction and she hums. Not a tune, just a tone, a low steady note that means everything is going according to plan. You know Thomas's deal. You've had months to figure it out. Thomas is not a bad person, but Thomas is someone for whom the kitchen's compromises have become invisible through familiarity. He's been doing this for 4 years. Everything that you found surprising or uncomfortable in your first months. The returned butter, the freshened oysters, the wine mix. To Thomas, these are simply the weather of the job. He doesn't do them with malice or pride. He does them the way you breathe, automatically without thinking, because not doing them would require more conscious effort than doing them. You wonder sometimes if you're becoming Thomas. You watch yourself. You notice the moments when you start to do something, and the reflex kicks in before the thought does. When you take a tray of returned butter to the rack without a pause. When you carry leftover soup back to the pot without considering the question. When you help Vincenzo with the oysters and your hands move through the freshening process and there's no particular feeling attached to it. You notice this. And then you notice that you noticed, and you're not sure which part of that sequence is the important one. Herr Fauscher calls you into his office on a Wednesday morning in April. This has never happened before. The kitchen staff interact with Fauscher primarily at a distance. He circulates, he observes, he delivers verdicts on quality and cost. But he doesn't typically call you specifically to his desk. That's a management level above yours. The office is small, a desk, a stool, a wall of ledgers, a window that looks onto the alley, through which you can see the rear wall of the building opposite and, at an angle, a sliver of sky. Fauscher is behind his desk. He looks tired. He often looks tired. The restaurant business in 1893 does not improve a man's complexion, but today he looks specifically tired, a tiredness that has a cause. Sit. You sit on the stool. Your hands are clean. You checked before coming in. Ferker looks at you for a moment. He has a large square head and dark eyes and a moustache that he keeps carefully trimmed, the one vanity in an otherwise functional appearance. You've been here nearly a year, he says. Yes, sir, almost. And you work hard. Jacques tells me you work hard. That's not nothing. Most kitchen boys, they last 6 months and then they leave or I send them away. He pauses. You've stayed. You wait. I want to make you a junior prep cook. More responsibility, better pay. He names a figure that's more than you currently earn by a meaningful amount. You'll work under Vincenzo, learning the prep work, sauces, basic butchery. The offer is genuine. You can hear it. It's a real promotion. The beginning of a real kitchen career, the first step on a path that leads eventually to being someone like Jacques, or someone better than Jacques in a better kitchen. You should say yes. You should say yes without hesitation, because you sleep in the basement on a sack of straw, and you have less than $3 to your name, and a better wage and a better title is not a complicated decision. You say, "Can I ask you something first?" Fauscha's eyebrows rise slightly. This is not the expected response. "The wedding beef," you say. Silence. A long silence, the kind that has weight to it, that you feel physically across the desk. "The beef from the hotel," you say. Quieter now, because the silence has made you uncertain. "In February, 3 people got sick." Fauscha's expression doesn't change. His hands, which were flat on the desk, stay flat on the desk. "What is your question?" he says. Not a question. A statement that sounds like a warning spoken in a calm voice. "I want to know, if that happens again, if something comes in that I'm not sure about, what do I do?" Fauscha looks at you for a long moment. "You do your job," he says. "Jacques makes the decisions about what is used. That is not your question to ask. And if Jacques decides something that I think is... Jacques..." Fauscha cuts you off, not loudly, precisely. "Has been a professional cook for 15 years. He understands kitchen management better than you will in 15 years of your own. You're 15 years old and you wash dishes." "I know," you say. "I know. I'm not saying..." "What are you saying?" His voice is still calm. This is worse than shouting. You look at the window, the sliver of sky. A bird crosses it quickly and is gone. "I'm saying I want to do good work," you say finally, "and I want to know that the work I'm doing isn't hurting anyone." Fauscha is quiet. He picks up a pen and turns it in his fingers. Not writing, just turning it. A thinking gesture. "People eat here every night," he says. "They go home. They come back. My customers have been coming here for 7 years since I opened. Some of them have been coming every week for 7 years. If my food was hurting them, they would stop coming. They would stop coming and they would tell other people and I would be closed. I am not closed." He sets down the pen. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" You understand the logic. It's not entirely wrong on a statistical level. Most of the food is fine. Most of the compromises cause no harm, or at least no traceable harm to anyone. The system mostly works. "Yes, sir," you say. "The promotion stands," Fauscha says. "Think about it. Give me your answer tomorrow." You give him your answer that evening. You say yes. What else would you do? Leave? Go where? Do what? You're 15 years old in a city of 1.5 million people, and you have a skill, small, partial, not yet fully formed, and you have a job, and the job is paying you to learn more of the skill, and the man offering you the promotion is not wrong that most of the food is fine, and most of the people eating it go home unharmed. You say yes, and Vincenzo begins teaching you, and your education in what actually happens in a professional kitchen deepens by another order of magnitude. Vincenzo is, it turns out, an exceptional teacher. This surprises you. He's not a man who seems to have teaching in him, quiet, concentrated, not given to explanation. But he has a method that works precisely because it doesn't involve words. He shows you something. He watches you try it. He corrects your hands with his hands, and he does this until it's right. And then he moves to the next thing. He shows you stocks first. The hierarchy of stocks. White veal stock, fond blanc, made from blanched veal bones, mirepoix onion, carrot, celery, a bouquet garni. Brown stock, fond brun, made from roasted bones, caramelized mirepoix, deep and dark and complex. Fish stock, which takes 20 minutes and is ruined by excess time. Vegetable stock, which is what it is and nothing more. These are the foundation. Everything builds from these. A sauce is a stock with something done to it. A braise is a piece of meat cooked in stock. Soup is stock with additions. When you understand this, really understand it, in your hands rather than your head, the kitchen reorders itself in your perception. You can see the structure under the surface, the way every dish relates to every other dish through the medium of stock. This is interesting. Genuinely, unexpectedly interesting. There's a pleasure in it that you didn't anticipate. The mechanical pleasure of repetitive skill building, yes. The way your hands get faster at the knife. The way you start to feel the doneness of a sauce by how it coats the back of a spoon rather than by timing it. But also a deeper pleasure, something connected to understanding, to seeing how things work. You realize, good at this. Not in the way Thomas is good at it. Thomas's competence is deep, but it's settled. It doesn't grow. It arrived at a plateau and stayed there. You're good at it in a different way, the way someone is good at something when they're still learning, when every session adds something new, when the skill is still expanding. Jacques watches you sometimes. You catch him watching. A brief assessment, unreadable, that ends when he looks away. You don't know what conclusion he's drawing. You suspect he's drawing the correct one, which is that you have more aptitude than a kitchen boy in this place has any use for. Summer arrives, and with it the full weight of New York in July. You need to understand what the kitchen is like in July. The ranges don't stop. They can't stop. Service requires them burning from 5 in the morning, when the breakfast prep begins. Delmonico's dining rooms doesn't serve breakfast itself, but supplies bread and pastries to a hotel 2 blocks away, which means Mrs. Oberlin has been baking since 4 until 10:30 at night when the last dinner plates go out. The temperature in the kitchen in July, with 6 burners and 2 ovens burning coal all day, is approximately 110 degrees Fahrenheit. This is not a guess. Thomas had a thermometer once, a laboratory instrument, the kind with a glass tube and a mercury column, and on a July afternoon he put it near the range and watched it climb past the scale. "It doesn't go that high," he said, holding the thermometer, and this was so close to a joke that everyone in the kitchen laughed, which meant they stopped working for approximately 3 seconds, which was long enough for Jacques to give them a look that restarted everything. You work in heat. Your shirt is soaked through within 30 minutes of arriving in the morning and stays soaked for the rest of the day. The hair at the back of your neck is permanently damp. Your hands, wrist deep in the dishwater or handling hot pans, lose their sense of temperature after a while. Everything is hot or hotter, and the distinction between the two becomes less important than it should be. The food spoils faster in July. The ice chest, struggling already in March, is genuinely inadequate in July. Forscher orders additional ice, expensive, maddeningly expensive, and it still isn't enough. The morning delivery of fish that was fine in November is iffy by Tuesday in July. The milk goes sour. The cream turns within 24 hours in the cold room if the ice isn't packed carefully around it. Jacques' morning calculations become more fraught. The line between usable and unusable, which moves southward in March, moves further still in July. The cooking gets longer. The sauces get stronger. The hash turns over faster because material cycles through more quickly, driven by heat rather than time. You lose weight in July, not because you're not eating, you eat the same staff meals, but because you sweat so much that the calories leave through your skin before your body can store them. Your forearms are permanently scored by small burn marks from the edge of hot pans. Not careless burns. You've learned to be careful. It's the incidental contact, the glancing touch that happens 100 times a day in a kitchen this size. They heal and scar and new ones appear. By August you stop noticing them. This is what the body does with a job. It adapts. It makes itself match. You think sometimes about the boy who arrived in November of last year, who flinched at the smell of the cold room and felt sick watching Vincenzo handle the oysters. That boy is still in you somewhere. You can find him if you look, but he's further down than he used to be, under layers of months and heat and the accumulated knowledge of exactly how the food you eat and the food other people eat is actually produced. You carry this knowledge. It doesn't leave. In August, something unusual happens. A journalist comes to the kitchen. This doesn't happen in the normal run of things. The kitchen is, by design and tradition, invisible. The front of house is the restaurant. The kitchen is the mechanism that produces it, and mechanisms are not for public viewing, and nobody who runs a restaurant in 1894 would voluntarily invite a journalist to stand in their kitchen and look at things. This journalist doesn't come through the front. He comes through the alley. He is young, maybe 25, with a suit that is trying hard to be respectable, and a notebook that is already half full. His name is Creighton, he tells you, and he's writing for a weekly newspaper you've heard of but never read, and he wants to talk to someone who works in the kitchen. Not Faucher, not Jacques, someone at your level. He finds you at the service door on a Tuesday afternoon during the quiet hour between services, sitting on an upturned crate eating a piece of bread. You work in there? Yes. How long? Since last November. He sits down on the alley step and opens his notebook and looks at you with an expression that is, you recognise this, having been looked at by adults your whole life. The expression of someone who has decided you might be useful. I'm writing about food, he says, how it gets prepared, what actually happens in places like this. Forker doesn't know you're here. No, and I'd rather he didn't find out if possible. I'm not trying to get you in trouble. I'm trying to... He pauses. There's a movement. Some people are starting to ask questions about what goes into the food that people eat. Not just here, in canned goods, in meat, in bread. He taps the notebook. I'm trying to write something true. You look at him. He has the energy of someone who believes that writing something true will change something. You recognise this energy because it was a kind of energy you had once, in the early weeks, when the things you were witnessing seemed fresh enough to be outrage rather than weather. You think about Faucher's promotion, the additional 30 cents a week, Vincenzo and the knife skills, Jacques watching you from across the kitchen. I can't tell you anything about this specific kitchen, you say. Creighton's face falls slightly. But, you say, I can tell you how kitchens generally work, in my observation, which is not specific to any particular establishment. He looks at you for a long moment. You're 15, he says. Yes. And you've been in this kitchen for 9 months. Something like that. He opens his notebook to a blank page. Tell me, he says, how kitchens generally work. You talk to him for 45 minutes. You don't give him the name of the restaurant. You don't name Jacques or Faucher or Thomas or anyone. You speak in general terms about general practices, the kind of general terms that someone familiar with the restaurant industry would recognise immediately as specific and would nod at in unhappy recognition. You tell him about the bread, about the butter, about the stockpot and its relationship to time, about the hash, about the freshening of shellfish, about the long-cooked preparations that extend the life of proteins past their natural expiration. You tell him about the wedding beef, still in general terms, a delivery of leftover event food, purchased cheaply, recycled into service. You tell him about the 3 complaints in March, and the nervousness in the kitchen, and the way it passed within a week without consequence. Creighton writes rapidly. His handwriting is small and cramped, and he fills 6 pages. He asks occasional questions, not challenging questions, not trap questions, but the questions of someone filling in the picture. Is this everywhere? He asks. Every restaurant. I've only been in this one, you say. But everything I've seen, everything I've been taught, the people who taught me, they didn't invent any of this. This is how it works. These are the standard practices. How do you know it's standard if you've only been in one kitchen? It's a good question. Because nobody explains it, you say. When Vincenzo showed me how to freshen oysters, he didn't say, "This is a special thing we do here." He showed me the same way he showed me how to make a beurre blanc, as a standard technique. Something you do, something everyone does. If it were unusual, someone would have said so. Creighton underlined something in his notebook. What would need to happen, he asks, for things to be different? You think about this. The heat of the alley, the smell of the city in August, the sound of a cart horse on 23rd Street, the distant din of a kitchen about to come back to life. Someone would need to have authority over it, you say. Someone who isn't the owner, an inspector maybe. Someone who can walk into a kitchen and say, "This practice stops," and have the power to make it stop. That doesn't exist, I know. Could it exist? I'm 15, you say. I wash dishes. I don't know what can exist. Creighton smiles, writes something. Can I quote you, without your name? You think about Forger, about the promotion, about the straw sack in the basement. A kitchen worker, you say, at a New York restaurant. Don't say which street, don't say how old, just someone who works there. Creighton closes his notebook. Why are you telling me this? He asks, not accusingly, genuinely. You think about the 3 people who got sick in March. The woman who came in looking pale and thin. The letter written in angry handwriting. You think about the oysters, cold in their freshening water. You think about Mrs. Oberlin's pastry cream, the way she described the sugar as a preservative with the same flat certainty you'd use to describe the weather. Because someone should know, you say. I don't know what they should do with it, but someone should know. The article publishes in September. You read it at a newsstand on 23rd Street, standing in the morning before the kitchen opens, in the thin September light. It's on page 4, half a column. The headline reads, "The Hidden Economy of the Restaurant Kitchen. What becomes of yesterday's dinner?" Creighton has done his work. The article is good, careful, specific, without being accusatory of any named establishment, grounded in the kind of detail that makes it feel reported rather than invented. He quotes several sources, you among them, all unnamed, all described generically. A kitchen worker at a respected Manhattan establishment. A cook with 15 years in New York restaurants. A former waiter at multiple upscale dining venues. The practices he describes are the ones you described to him, plus others from his other sources that you recognize immediately. The recooking of leftover fish in hotels, the practice of mixing fresh and day-old cream in ices at confectioners, the way bread pudding and daily specials act as repositories for things that can no longer be presented in their original form. He connects it to public health. Briefly, carefully. He mentions the germ theory. He mentions that 3 people died of typhoid in the previous year after attending the same hotel dinner, and that the cause was traced with some confidence to inadequate refrigeration, and that this is not an isolated incident but part of a pattern that nobody is tracking systematically. He asks in the final paragraph whether the city and the state have an obligation to its citizens to regulate the condition of food before it reaches them. It's a good article. You read it twice, standing at the newsstand, until the vendor gives you a look that suggests you should either buy it or move along. You buy it. Nothing happens. This is important to understand. You read the article and you feel something. A strange mix of recognition and distance, like looking at a photograph of a place you've been. And then you go to the kitchen and it's Tuesday, and the bread from Monday is on the rack, and the stockpot is simmering, and Jacques is in the cold room doing his morning calculations, and the kitchen is exactly the same as it was yesterday. The article causes no ripples in Fauche's world. You watch carefully for days, for any sign that he's read it, for any nervousness, any conversation between him and Jacques that seems pointed, for any change in procedure. Nothing. Not because Fauche is defiant, more because he didn't read it. He reads the financial papers and the trade publications for the restaurant industry, and a German-language newspaper from a city he left 20 years ago. He doesn't read the kind of weekly paper that published Creighton's article. And even if he had read it, even if he recognized every practice described in it, it still wouldn't change anything, because there's nothing in the article that gives anyone formal authority to change anything. There's no inspector on the doorstep. There's no law being cited. There's just a column on page 4 saying that restaurants recycle food, which everyone in the restaurant industry already knows, and which the restaurant-going public, even if they read it and believed it and felt appropriately appalled, has no mechanism to act on beyond the individual choice to eat elsewhere. And eating elsewhere doesn't solve the problem, because elsewhere does the same thing. You understand this more clearly after the article than before it. The article is a pebble dropped in a pond. The circles spread. They reach the edge of the pond and stop. Thomas reads the article. He finds it in a copy of the paper that someone left in the kitchen. A delivery man, probably. He reads it during the lunch break, standing at the prep counter, eating bread and reading with his characteristic expression of continuous mild calculation. He finishes it, folds the paper, sets it down. Somebody talked, he says, not angrily, almost admiringly. The tone of a man who has been in the game long enough to respect a move he didn't anticipate. He looks around the kitchen. His eyes stop at you for a moment, no longer than they stop at anyone else. You are the most recent arrival, the most obvious candidate, and you are 15, which makes you either more likely to have done it or less, depending on your reading of 15-year-olds. Somebody talked, he says again, and goes back to his bread. Nobody follows up on this. It's September. The dinner service is full. The tickets are filling the rail. There's work to do. Fall deepens, and you learn the art of the sauce. This is Vincenzo's final lesson, or the beginning of the lessons that will never really end. The sauce is the central mystery of French-influenced restaurant cooking, the thing that separates a trained cook from someone who has simply been near food for a long time. Jacques oversees this directly, which surprises you. He doesn't usually involve himself in the prep cook training. He lets Vincenzo handle it, but sauces are different. Jacques cares about sauces the way Fauche cares about money, not as a pleasure, but as a professional obligation, something he holds himself accountable to at a level that the rest of the kitchen only partially understands. He sits you down one afternoon, the quiet hour, the between services silence, and places a small pot on the range, and he makes a demi-glace from scratch, from the brown stock, and he talks while he does it. Not a lecture, not a lesson with bullet points. He talks the way people talk when they're doing something they know very well, which is in half sentences and digressions, with his hands as the primary instrument of communication. Stock, he says, is time. You cannot make stock fast. You cannot rush it. The collagen in the bones. He gestures, a rolling motion with one hand. It takes hours to dissolve. You can boil it and ruin it, or you can simmer it and make it. The difference between a boil and a simmer is the difference between cloudy and clear, between cheap restaurant and good restaurant. The stock in the pot is dark, properly dark, a deep mahogany, not the pale brown of an undercooked thing. It smells extraordinary. The sauce starts here, in the stock. If the stock is wrong, nothing you do to it afterward is right. He looks at you. You understand? The foundation is everything. A bad foundation, you cannot fix it later. Yes, sir. You've been here a year. Almost. You've learned to do the right things for the wrong reasons. He says this flatly, factually, not cruelly. You learned fast because you were afraid of making mistakes. Now you need to learn for the right reasons because it matters. You think about the butter, the oysters, the hash. Everything matters, you ask. And you mean it to be a simple question, but it comes out with an edge you didn't put there consciously. Jacques looks at you. A long look. The kind where someone is deciding how much to give you. I've worked in 4 kitchens, he says. Before this one, a hotel in Montreal, a ship's kitchen, 1 crossing. I will never do it again. A private household in Boston. Here. A pause. Every kitchen does what the kitchen does. Every kitchen. The hotel in Montreal. They threw away less than we do. The Boston household. They wasted more than anyone. It's not. He stops, starts again. The question isn't waste or no waste. The question is what level of care is possible within what resources. And if the resources don't allow the right level of care, then people get sick sometimes. He says it evenly. And that's wrong. And I know it's wrong. And I cook anyway because that's what I am. He adjusts the heat under the demi-glace. When you have your own kitchen, he says, you'll make your own calculations. Some of them will be ones you're proud of. Some of them won't. I'm 15. I know. I was 15 once too. Winter comes again. Your second winter in the kitchen. The cold room is cold again, finally, and things keep longer, and the morning calculations are easier, and Jacques' posture relaxes slightly in the way it does when the season changes and the margins widen. You've been here 14 months. You are, by the kitchen's internal accounting, no longer new. Forture hires a new kitchen boy in December. A kid from somewhere in New Jersey, 12 years old, with enormous dark eyes, and the expression of someone who has been recently dropped from a great height and hasn't finished falling. You show him the ice chest. You show him the dish station. The way to carry stacked plates without the top one sliding. The correct angle for the scrub brush on the large pots, where the coal scuttle lives and the rhythm of keeping the ranges fed. You don't show him the returned bread on the rack and tell him it's going back out. He learns that on his own. You watch his face when he figures it out. A Wednesday afternoon, a tray of rolls brought back from the dining room, Thomas directing him to the rack. The boy looks at the rolls, looks at Thomas, looks at you. You hold his gaze for a moment. Then Thomas says, "Come on." And the boy sets the rolls on the rack and goes back to his station, and the afternoon continues. Later, in the basement, while you're both settling for the night, he has the crate near the boiler, your old spot, and you've graduated to an actual cot in the corner that someone left behind. He says in a very small voice, "Do they always do that?" "Yes," you say. "Is that—" He hesitates. "Is that okay?" You lie on the cot and look at the ceiling, which is the underside of the kitchen floor, through which you can feel the faint vibration of the ranges above and smell the ghost of the day's cooking. "No," you say. "It's not okay." A pause. Then why does everybody do it? You think about Creighton's article, page 4. the circles reaching the edge of the pond and stopping. You think about Forscher's promotion and his 7 years of customers who keep coming back. You think about Jacques making demi-glace and telling you about foundations. You think about 3 people sick in March. Because nobody's stopped them yet, you say. Here's the thing about the 1890s that you understand by now, in December of your 2nd year, from the basement of a restaurant on 23rd Street. The city is a machine for producing the appearance of standards. The white tablecloths are the standard. The maître d' who looks down his nose, the menu in French, the silver-plated cutlery that looks silver in the candle glow, these are the standard. The customer sitting at table 7 believes they're receiving something for their money. A contract, an implicit promise that the food on the plate is what the menu says it is. The kitchen knows that this belief is partially constructed, that the contract has finer print the customer never sees. But here's the other thing. The kitchen also believes in the standard, not the false version of it, the real one. Jacques believes in the demi-glace. He believes in the correct knife cut, the properly clarified stock, the sauce that reduces to exactly the right consistency. He believes in this with the precision of faith, and he holds it alongside the reality of returned oysters and wedding beef without apparent contradiction, because for him these are 2 separate questions. The question of craft, which he answers with rigour, and the question of economics, which he answers with pragmatism. And the separation between them is a professional skill he developed over 15 years and which he has never once examined as a problem. Mrs. Oberlin believes in the pastry. She would be offended, genuinely personally offended, if someone suggested her eclairs were anything less than excellent. She recycles yesterday's pastry cream not because she doesn't care about quality, but because she has calculated, from experience, the point at which yesterday's cream combined with today's cream equals an acceptable product. This calculation may or may not be correct. She believes it is. Thomas believes in efficiency. His belief is narrower than the others and has less warmth in it, but it is a belief of some kind, a conviction that the system as it operates is the correct system, that the question of what should be thrown away and what should be used is a question with a right answer, and that he knows the right answer. You're still figuring out what you believe. You're 15.5 years old and you are a junior prep cook at a restaurant on 23rd Street, and you're good at your job, and the job is not always clean, and the gap between what the dining room believes and what the kitchen knows is a gap you live in every day. This is, you understand, the condition of the work, not the unique condition of this kitchen, or this city, or this decade, the condition of the work. The question is not how to escape it. The question is what you do with what you know. On a Wednesday evening in January of 1895, 2 things happen. The first, a fire breaks out in the kitchen of a restaurant on 26th Street, a bigger place than Forscher's, better known, one of the ones that has a proper reputation and charges prices that reflect it. The fire starts in a poorly maintained flue above one of the ranges and spreads quickly to the wooden frame of the building. Nobody dies, but the kitchen is destroyed and the dining room is heavily damaged by smoke and water, and the restaurant closes. You hear about this from Thomas the following morning. He tells it with the specific attention to detail that fire stories always get in a community of people who work near open flames all day. The origin point, the time of discovery, the speed of spread, the damage to property. And then he says, almost incidentally, they found things in the kitchen when the inspectors went through. Unfit goods, product beyond use. Inspectors, fire inspectors, Not food inspectors. They don't have food inspectors. A pause. But the fire inspectors documented what was there. Some of it made the papers. You're quiet. Could have been this kitchen, Thomas says, not threateningly, observationally. Could be any kitchen in the city. The second thing that happens that evening, Creighton comes back. He finds you again at the service door during the quiet hour, and he looks different. Still young, still with the suit that's trying hard, but the notebook is newer and there's something in his energy that wasn't there in August. More directed. I had a response, he says, to the article. What kind? Letters. More than I expected. Mostly from people who work in restaurant kitchens, who wrote to say, yes, this is accurate, I can tell you more, and 2 letters from doctors, and 1 from a man at the Board of Health. You look at him. The Board of Health. He's not authorised to do anything formally, not yet. But he's interested. He's been interested for a while. Creighton is talking faster than he was in August, the words closer together, the notebook open but not being written in. There's a movement happening, not just here, in Chicago, in Boston, in some of the Midwestern cities. People are starting to talk about regulation, about inspection, about someone having the legal authority to walk into a kitchen and say, this stops. You said those words. In August, to him. He wrote them down. I'm writing a longer piece, he says. A series, actually, on food adulteration and food safety and what needs to change. I want to use more of what you know. I'm still working here. I know. I don't need the name of the restaurant. I need the detail, the specificity, what actually happens. You think about the boy in the basement, 12 years old, asking if it's okay. You think about the 3 complaints in March. You think about Vincenzo with the oysters, automatic, practiced, untroubled. I can tell you more, you say. The series publishes through the spring of 1895. 6 articles. Creighton's best work, he tells you later, though he says this with the humility of someone who knows best work so far is a low bar when you're 25. The articles cover food adulteration broadly, not just restaurants but canned goods, milk, which is a separate and extensive scandal you didn't know about, involving dilution, contamination, and levels of bacterial content that make the restaurant practices look almost controlled by comparison. Bread, chalk added to flour to increase weight, which you did not know, and the broader question of who bears responsibility for what reaches a person's plate. The articles are read. More than the first one, they're cited by reformers, picked up by larger papers in partial form, discussed in the correspondence columns. A state senator from Buffalo gives a speech in Albany that cites one of them directly. Things happen slowly. This is important. The things that change because of reporting like Creighton's, because of reformers and doctors and Board of Health men who are interested, they change over years, not weeks. The Pure Food and Drug Act that will eventually exist, that will eventually give inspectors legal authority over kitchens and packaged food, and the content of what people eat. It's not coming in 1895. It's coming in 1906. 11 years away. A whole other decade. But the conversation is beginning, and conversations, even slow ones, have effects. Felsher hires a new supplier for fish in the spring of 1895. The new supplier is more expensive but delivers twice as often. Smaller quantities, fresher product. This is not Felsher's concession to principle. It's his concession to the changing market. His customers are beginning to ask questions quietly, in the way that customers do when something has been in the air. Where is your fish from? How fresh is it? The kind of question that signals to a restaurant owner that the ambient conversation has shifted and the public appetite for assurance has increased. Jacques doesn't change his calculations dramatically, but you notice that the line he draws in the cold room moves slightly. Things that would have been pressed into service in the previous year get discarded now. Not because of law, not because of regulation, but because the calculus of risk has changed in some marginal way that Jacques, with his 15 years of professional instinct, has registered and responded to. This is how things change, not in leaps, in the adjustment of margins. You leave Delmonico's dining rooms in June of 1896. You're 17. You leave not because anything goes wrong, not because of a confrontation with Faucher or a falling out with Jacques or any dramatic conclusion. You leave because a cook you know from a kitchen supply errand, a man named Reinhold who works at a hotel kitchen near Central Park, mentions that they're hiring a second sous chef and asks if you know anyone. You say, I might be interested myself. The hotel pays better. The kitchen is larger. The chef at the hotel kitchen is a man named Beaumont who trained in France. Actually trained in France, not Jacques' kind of approximately French-influenced cooking, and who runs a kitchen with a level of rigour that is, you discover in your first week, both more demanding and more honest than what you're used to. Beaumont throws things away. This is the first thing you notice. Things that Fulcher's kitchen would have cycled into service, Beaumont's kitchen puts in the waste bin. Not everything. Not carelessly. But the line is drawn at a different place, and the line is drawn based on the kind of assessment you've been doing in your head for 2 years. The smell test, the time calculation, the question of whether something can be used honestly. We don't need to save every penny at the expense of what's right, Beaumont tells the kitchen, on a morning when you've been there 3 weeks, addressing everyone. He doesn't make speeches often. This is a rare one. This hotel has a reputation. The reputation is worth more than the cost of what goes in the waste bin. You understand me. You understand him. You've understood the argument for a while. You've been waiting to see it applied. It's not pure. No kitchen is pure. There are still things that happen in Beaumont's kitchen that you wouldn't advertise to the dining room. But the compromises are smaller. The margins are tighter in a different direction. And when something goes in the waste bin, it goes because someone decided it should rather than because the system failed to catch it first. This is better. Not perfect. Better. The last time you see Creighton is in September of 1896. You run into each other on Broadway by accident. He's coming out of a building, you're passing on the sidewalk, and you recognise each other across the ordinary current of pedestrian traffic. He looks better than he did. The suit is better. He's been promoted at the paper. The series ran in 4 other cities, he says. Chicago ran 3 of the articles. They have a stronger food safety movement there. Chicago has the stockyards, which is a whole other situation. I've heard about the stockyards. You should read what Upton Sinclair is working on. He says the name as though you should know it. You don't. You will, eventually. Is anything actually going to change, you ask? Creighton thinks about this. Yes, he says. Slowly. It already has. In some ways you don't see. There are more inspections in certain cities. Some manufacturers have changed labelling practices. Small things. A pause. But the restaurant problem is harder, because it's invisible, because it happens behind a door, because the only people who see it are the people working there, and most of them don't have any reason to speak. I did. You did. He looks at you. Why? You've been asked this before. You gave him an answer last time because someone should know that answer is still true, but you have more of an answer now. Because I was going to be doing it forever, you say, and I needed to know that someone outside it knew it was happening, not to fix it necessarily, not right then, just to know it. Creighton looks at you for a moment. How old are you now? 17, he nods. 17, as if recalibrating something. You understand, he says, that what you told me, what everyone told me, it didn't make anyone immediately safe. The people eating at these places are still eating what they were eating before the articles. I know. So what did it accomplish? You're standing on Broadway in September of 1896, 17 years old, with 2 years of kitchen work making your hands rough and your forearms scarred and your understanding of the world somewhat different from the one you arrived with. It means the next conversation is easier, you say. Someone reads that article and they can say, this was written down, this was reported, it's not a rumour, it's not a secret, somebody knows. And that's enough. You think about the boy in the basement, 12 years old, asking if it was okay. You told him no. You told him it wasn't okay. He set the rolls on the rack anyway because he had no other option, because the alternative to this job was a worse situation and you both knew it. But he knew. He knew it wasn't okay, and that knowledge was in him now. And knowledge has a way of finding consequences eventually, even when the route isn't direct. I don't know if it's enough, you say, but it's what we've got. So, here we are, in a kitchen in New York, in the 1890s, and the tablecloths are white and the sauce is good, and the soup contains a week's worth of accumulated history, and 3 people got sick in March and nobody paid consequences, and a journalist wrote 6 articles and a senator gave a speech, and 11 years later there will be a law. You've spent a year and more in the mechanism behind the performance. You've learned to make a demi-glace and to hold the knowledge of where it comes from at the same time, without resolving the contradiction. Because the contradiction cannot be resolved by you, not in 1895 or 1896, not in this kitchen or any kitchen within 10 blocks. The restaurants are still serving the hash. The butter is still going back in the mould. The oysters are still freshening in their water. And the food, most of the time, is fine. And the food, some of the time, is not fine. And someone gets sick. And the connection is not made and nothing changes immediately. And then slowly, over years and decades, through reporting and reform and the slow creep of public awareness and the slow development of legal mechanisms and the slow turn of political will, things change. Not completely, not finally, not without backsliding and compromise in the eternal friction between the cost of doing it right and the profit available from doing it less right. But change. Tomorrow you'll be in Beaumont's kitchen at 5 in the morning. The deliveries will arrive. You'll receive them in the service alley. You'll carry them in. You'll start the stocks. Your hands will smell like the kitchen within an hour. They'll smell like it all day. You'll go to sleep smelling like it. This is the job. This is the job in 1896, and it will be the job in 1906, and it will be the job in 1996, and it will be the job tonight. Wherever tonight's kitchen boys are receiving tonight's deliveries and watching tonight's cooks make tonight's calculations about what can still be served. The kitchen doesn't change. The line between acceptable and unacceptable moves. It moves through law and pressure and consequence and time, but the kitchen doesn't change. And the people in it, The Vincenzos and the Jackses and the Thomases and the kids sleeping in the basement on straw. They go on doing what they do with the skill and the compromise and the knowledge, carrying both at once because that's the only way to carry them. You've earned your rest. You've stood in the heat all day. You've washed the plates and simmered the stock and pressed the butter back in the mould and asked the questions and kept on asking them, even when the answers weren't satisfying. That's enough. That's what you had. Let the kitchen go quiet now. The ranges banked down to coals, the ticket rail empty, the pans racked and the knives wiped clean and the cold room latched. The city outside is still running. It always runs. New York in 1895 doesn't sleep, and New York in 2024 doesn't sleep. And all the hours between those 2 points are filled with kitchens and kitchens and kitchens, each one a small hot world of its own, each one making its calculations, each one producing the thing that appears on the table in the white tablecloth room with the candlelight and the silver-plated cutlery. All of it happening just the other side of a swinging door. Your hands are in your lap. They're not clean. They're never quite clean, but they're resting now, and the weight of the day is leaving them, and the smell of the kitchen is fading, the way all smells fade when they become the air you breathe instead of something arriving from outside. You've eaten. You're warm enough. The weight of knowing things is still there. It doesn't go away. Knowledge doesn't go away. But it's quieter now, settled into a lower register, a thing you carry rather than a thing that carries you. The stockpot on the back burner has been simmering since Monday. By Thursday, it will be soup. It's always been this way. Let it be. Let the smell of the kitchen follow you into sleep the way it follows you everywhere else. There in the background, familiar now, part of the texture of the life you're living. Let the sounds of 23rd Street fade, the horse carts, the voices, the distant church bell marking an hour you're too tired to count. And somewhere in the city right now, a dining room is lit with gas jets, and the tablecloths are white, and the sauce is good, and a gentleman at table 7 is eating something that was prepared with skill and care and compromise, and he doesn't know the compromise, and he'll finish his dinner and feel satisfied, and he'll come back next week. And somewhere behind the swinging door, a kitchen boy is learning something he'll spend the rest of his life holding. That's the restaurant. That's always been the restaurant. Sleep now. The kitchen will still be there in the morning. It's always there in the morning. Good night.